sight, friends found unsound, jobs claimed right. Potter worked clay on the sixth day. Clay had a crack and took a smack. Iron with clay stood tall, so kingdoms all, they would not cleave, to dust they fall. Dust with spittle clay, blind eyes open that day. Potter worked clay on the sixth day. Clay had a crack and took a smack. If vessel breaks, who shaped it wrong? Potter worked clay on the sixth day. Clay had a crack and took a smack.
I want you to just close your eyes for a second. Unless you're driving, of course. If you're driving, please keep them firmly on the road.
Definitely keep them on the road.
Yeah, safety first. But if you can, I want you to imagine this ancient city. And I'm not talking about your typical historical fantasy here.
Right.
This isn't a city that's bustling with merchants haggling over spices in a market or, echoing with the march of some massive army. It's not ruled by a king sitting on a golden throne.
It's completely different.
It's totally silent. It's a quiet place built entirely, like from the bedrock all the way up, around one single obsessive pursuit. And that pursuit is knowledge. Right at the center of this city, I want you to imagine 4 massive stone temples. They are imposing, they're permanent, and they are completely quiet. There are no sacrifices being offered on altars. You won't find anybody whispering prayers into the rafters.
No priests, no incense.
Exactly. It is a completely different kind of worship. And today we are taking a deep dive into this absolutely fascinating, maybe slightly intimidating, but ultimately beautiful philosophical architecture. It was created by witch-told Pyotr Nowak.
It's an incredibly rich conceptual map to explore.
It really is. We have a huge stack of his works right in front of us today, and our mission is to extract the absolute most mind-bending insights from them for you. We're going to be looking at his conceptual map called the Quadrivium Novum.
Also known as the Temples of Correlation.
Right, the Temples of Correlation. And we're looking at that alongside this really fascinating historical and conceptual tool he uses called the Ostraca.
And to really frame this entire architectural concept, we are going to use 2 of his poetic musical works. They basically serve as the emotional bookends for this entire philosophical city.
Yeah, they really set the tone.
First, we have a blues ballad called Cracked Clay that acts as our prologue. And then we have this really beautiful Polish piece titled Ostraca, which translates to grace, and that serves as our epilogue.
And the tension between those 2 poems, right? That massive silent city sitting right between them, that is exactly what we are unpacking today.
Exactly.
Our mission today is to walk you, the listener, right through this hypothetical city. We're going to figure out what kind of knowledge is actually allowed inside those 4 massive temples, how it earns its place there, and, well, honestly, maybe more importantly, what gets locked outside those heavy iron gates.
Because, spoiler alert, Some of the things humanity cares about the absolute most are not allowed inside.
Oh yeah, feelings are going to be hurt.
Big time. Because what we are going to find on this journey is a radical, almost shocking map of human knowledge. It's a map that asks us to willingly strip away some of our deepest, most primal psychological needs.
Like our need for meaning.
Yes.
Yes.
Let's be honest. As humans, we have this desperate, hardwired need for absolute truth. We want divine intention. We want to know the ultimate why behind literally everything that happens to us.
From like a stubbed toe to a global catastrophe.
Right. But the architecture of Noah's city replaces that grand, sweeping certainty with something else entirely. It replaces it with a really demanding, incredibly modest, and rigorous worship of what we call correlation.
So today we're exploring that central tension. The tension between what we desperately want to know and what we can actually demonstrably prove.
It's quite a roadmap we have ahead of us.
It is. So we're going to start with a musical and poetic prologue to really ground us in the fundamental flaw of human existence. Because frankly, you can't understand the city if you don't understand why we needed to build it in the first place.
Absolutely.
Then we'll journey through these 4 massive temples of human knowledge to see how they actually operate on a day-to-day basis. After that, we're going to walk out to the boundary walls of the city and discover what gets banished outside the gates. And like we said, it's going to step on some toes.
Yeah, it definitely will.
And finally, we'll end with an epilogue that offers a really quiet, beautiful glimpse of hope just outside those walls. It's a massive conceptual journey. So let's just jump in. Let's start at the very beginning. The problem space, the prologue. Let's talk about the clay.
Yes, the clay. To understand why this incredibly strict, silent city of knowledge had to be built, we have to first understand the fundamental vulnerability of being human.
We break.
We do. We are fragile. And Noah frames this beautifully and tragically, really in his blues ballad, Cracked Clay, or in the original Polish, Peklichte Glina.
I'm looking at the translated lyrics for Cracked Clay right now, and it reads like this really dark folk song, or maybe like a gritty lullaby.
It has a very heavy rhythm to it.
It starts out, from water and dust, clay, hands on the clay, strife, breath, life, ash on the ground, no answer in sight. And then we get to this incredible, thumping, repeating chorus.
Potter worked clay on the 6th day. Clay had a crack and took a smack.
It is so visceral. You can almost hear that wet, heavy sound of the earth just being hit. Now, I assume that 6th day line is a direct nod to the Genesis creation story, right? But what exactly is Noah trying to say by focusing so heavily on the crack itself?
You're right on the money with the Genesis connection. It leans heavily on one of the oldest, most foundational motifs in the human religious imagination, the imagery of the potter and the clay.
It's everywhere in ancient texts.
Exactly. If you look at ancient Near Eastern texts, including the Hebrew Bible, humanity is frequently described as being formed from the dust or the mud of the earth. The Creator is the ultimate craftsman, taking this raw, formless material of existence, shaping it into a vessel, and then breathing life into it on the 6th day.
And that metaphor is incredibly powerful for early humanity, right? Because it implies design.
It implies intention. If you are a clay vessel and a master potter shaped you, then your existence is not just some random cosmic accident. You are meant to be exactly as you are. Your form has a purpose.
But that's exactly where Noah introduces this massive, really uncomfortable tension. Because the poem doesn't just stop at the beautiful, harmonious creation part where everything is just good.
No, it introduces a flaw immediately.
Right. Clay had a crack and took a smack. The vessel isn't perfect. It fails. It breaks. It suffers. And that leads to what I think is easily the most devastating, hard-hitting line in the entire piece.
If vessel breaks, who shaped it wrong?
Yes, that single line.
It's brilliant because it encapsulates the absolute pinnacle of human, philosophical, and theological struggle. It is the problem of evil and suffering distilled into basically 8 words.
When we experience suffering, when we confront the fragility of our own physical bodies, through disease or age.
Or when we see massive human endeavors fail. The poem explicitly mentions empires of iron and clay standing tall and then just falling to dust. When we see that, we are forced by our very nature to ask who is responsible.
Exactly. If the Creator is all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good, why is there a crack in the clay? Why do children get sick? Why do earthquakes happen?
The poem even references Job from the Hebrew Bible, saying, "Friends found unsound Job's claim of right."
Right. Job is like the ultimate historical archetype of this exact struggle. He's this genuinely good, blameless guy who just suffers terribly. He loses everything, and he basically demands a causal explanation from the universe.
He wants his day in court.
He does. He wants to take the creator to small claims court and say, look at my life. Why did you do this to me? He wants the ultimate why.
And it's crucial to look at what Job actually gets in that story. He gets a voice from a whirlwind. He gets a terrifying display of scale and majesty. The universe basically points to the Leviathan in the cosmos and says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?
Yeah, it's a total flex.
But he never actually gets a direct answer to the why. He never gets the causal explanation he was begging for.
And this connects so perfectly to you, the listener, in your everyday life. Think about it. It's so true. If my car breaks down on the highway, my immediate instinct isn't to rationally deduce the wear and tear on the alternator belt.
Of course not.
I want to know why the universe hates me today. I want to know which specific deity I offended yesterday by not holding the elevator.
It's the most human impulse in the world. We are meaning-making machines.
When you face the cracks in your own life, whether it's an illness, a devastating heartbreak, or just the failure of a project you poured your soul into, what is your immediate psychological instinct? You seek an ultimate cause. You seek a grand meaning. You want to know why this specific thing happened to you at this specific time.
But what if the ultimate, verified system of human knowledge completely refuses to answer that question?
That is the chilling realization. What if the universe of provable facts simply looks at your suffering, looks at the crack in your clay, and shrugs?
That abandonment of the why is what leads us directly away from the mud and the potter and straight to the iron gates of the Quadrivium Novum.
That's the ultimate catch, though. Approaching this city means checking that desperate why at the door.
And this represents a foundational shift in how we understand the world. It's a shift that took humanity thousands of years to make.
Because historically, ancient philosophy was completely obsessed with causality.
Entirely. Thinkers wanted to find the prime mover, the ultimate cause of every single effect. They wanted to trace the chain of events all the way back to the hand of the potter. But as thinkers like the Scottish philosopher David Hume pointed out in the 18th century, causality, the actual invisible force of one thing causing another, is incredibly slippery.
Let's pause and dig into that for a second, because on the surface, causality feels obvious. I mean, if I drop a glass, gravity causes it to fall. If I hit a baseball with a bat, the bat causes the ball to fly. What was Hume's problem with that?
Hume used the famous example of billiard balls on a pool table. Imagine you're leaning over a green felt pool table. You hit the cue ball, it rolls across the felt, it strikes the 8-ball, and the 8-ball shoots into the corner pocket.
Right.
Your brain immediately says, the cue ball caused the 8-ball to move. But Hume argued very strictly that you don't actually see the invisible magical force of cause transferring from one ball to the other.
Wait, really? Because I'm pretty sure I saw it hit the ball.
You saw the cue ball move, you saw the 2 balls touch, you heard a clack sound, and then you saw the 8-ball move. What you observed is a sequence of events.
Okay, I see where this is going.
You observed one event regularly following another event in time and space. You observed a pattern. The cause is an assumption your brain makes to tie the events together. Hume pointed out that we can't philosophically prove the invisible necessity of the cause. We can only prove the reliable repetition of the pattern.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because that shift from demanding absolute invisible causes to merely observing reliable, repeatable patterns is the exact foundation of our quiet ancient city.
Yes.
The guardians of the Quadrivium Novum do not worship gods. They do not worship divine revelation. They don't even worship metaphysical certainty or ultimate causes. They worship something far more grounded. They worship correlation.
Correlation is an absolutely brilliant concept because it is simultaneously deeply modest and incredibly demanding. It simply means finding patterns that hold true. If A happens, B tends to happen.
Well, it's the worship of the observable, repeatable link between variables.
Exactly. It doesn't claim to know the mind of God. It doesn't claim to know the ultimate purpose of the universe. It just says, hey, we noticed that every time we drop this apple, it falls at 9.8 meters per second squared. Let's write that down.
It relies on patterns that held true yesterday, patterns that hold true today and patterns that, statistically speaking, will likely hold true tomorrow.
And the people inside these 4 temples aren't priests in flowing robes, burning incense, and interpreting dreams?
No, they are mathematicians checking complex proofs on massive chalkboards. They are physicists in white coats repeating experiments with lasers and prisms. They are biologists tracing genetic inheritance across millions of years of fossil records. And they are sociologists mapping the incredibly messy, chaotic behavior of human societies into data sets.
They're building a fortress of verified patterns.
So let's stop standing outside. Let's step inside the gates. Let's walk right into the very first temple of the Quadrivium Novum, the temple of mathematical correlation. This represents logic.
When you first walk into the Temple of Mathematics, it feels almost like it belongs to the realm of the divine, even though we just said it doesn't.
It has that vibe for sure.
It feels completely timeless, pristine, and clean. Unlike a biological specimen that rots or a sociological trend that changes with the decade, mathematical truths seem eternal.
The geometry that Euclid laid down in ancient Alexandria over 2,000 years ago is exactly, flawlessly as true today as it was the moment he wrote it.
We often think of math as this perfect, abstract realm of absolute certainty, completely detached from the messy, physical, cracked clay of the real world.
It does feel like cheating a little bit, like math is the one thing that actually survived the fall from Eden perfectly intact. But I know it's not that simple, because even math had its crisis of faith, didn't it?
It absolutely did. In the early 20th century, mathematicians were trying to prove that math was a perfectly complete, flawless system where every true statement could be proven.
And then
And then a logician named Kurt Gödel came along and basically dropped a bomb on the temple.
I love this part.
He published his incompleteness theorems, which mathematically proved that there are fundamental limits to what math can prove about itself. He showed that in any sufficiently complex logical system, there will always be statements that are true, but absolutely unprovable within that system.
So you cannot have a mathematical system that is both entirely consistent and entirely complete.
Correct. Okay, my brain just did a little backflip. Math used math to prove that math can't prove everything.
Exactly. It was a deeply humbling moment for the discipline. It showed that even the purest logic has edges. It has boundaries.
Yet, despite Gödel's shattering revelation, math still retained its aura of ultimate rigorous necessity.
Because the correlations it does prove are rock solid. 2 plus 2 is still 4. The Pythagorean theorem still holds. But here is the very human element of this first temple that I find so fascinating and, honestly, maybe a little terrifying. A mathematical theorem doesn't just float out there in the ether, protecting itself like some indestructible artifact.
No, it doesn't.
It only survives as a verified truth inside this temple as long as living, breathing, flawed human mathematicians keep verifying it, line by line, equation by equation.
That's a profound point.
Yeah.
We tend to reify math. We treat it as a physical object, but it's actually an activity.
Right. I want to push on this a bit. Are we really saying that if every human on Earth suddenly forgot how to do calculus, calculus would cease to be true? Doesn't the universe still operate on calculus whether we check the math or not?
Well, the universe operates however it operates. But knowledge, which is what the Quadrivium Novum is a map of, requires a knower.
Oh.
Inside the city, a theorem is only part of the recognized architecture if the citizens can verify it. It relies on an unbroken, quiet persistence of trust and intersubjective verification.
Wait, let's pause on that phrase because it's going to come up a lot today. Intersubjective verification. That sounds like a spell you cast to get out of a graduate-level philosophy exam. Break that down for me. What does that actually look like in practice? Are we just saying I see it and you see it too?
It's a great question. And yes, at its core, that's exactly what it is, but with extreme prejudice.
Extreme prejudice. I like that.
Subjective means it's just in my head. My opinion, my feeling, my private experience. Objective implies a God's eye view, an absolute reality, independent of any observer, which, as we discussed with Hume, is really hard to prove.
So intersubjective is the middle ground.
It's the bridge. It means I observe this pattern, I write down the exact steps I took to observe it, I hand those steps to you, you follow them, and you observe the exact same pattern.
And then we hand it to 1,000 other people.
Exactly. People who speak different languages, hold different biases, maybe even people who actively want to prove us wrong.
Right.
If they all follow the steps and see the exact same pattern, we have intersubjective verification. It is reality by consensus of observation.
Okay, I love that. Reality by consensus of observation. So even the most pristine, abstract temple of mathematics relies on this ongoing collective human community to keep the lights on. It's not a dusty museum, it's an active daily practice.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows that even our most absolute knowledge is a verb, not a noun. And this active practice of verification becomes incredibly apparent when we leave the clean, quiet halls of mathematics and walk right across the courtyard into the second temple.
The temple of physical correlation. This is the realm of matter.
Let's make that transition.
I imagine walking out of the math temple is like leaving a silent white marble library, and walking into the physics temple just hits you like a wall. It smells like ozone, hot metal, and maybe a little bit of sweat.
It's visceral.
The atmosphere completely changes. You're surrounded by massive humming machines. There are spectrometers spitting out graphs, particle detectors buried deep underground in freezing salt mines, and giant radio telescopes pointing out into the dark, empty void of space. We've moved from the clean chalkboard to the incredibly messy, chaotic reality of the physical universe.
And in this transition from abstract to physical, the goal of the Guardians changes slightly. In physics, from the classical mechanics of Isaac Newton watching apples fall to the relativistic universe of Albert Einstein bending space and time, the goal isn't perfect, absolute logical certainty anymore.
The physical world is far too noisy for that.
There is random fluctuation, there is atmospheric interference, there is systematic bias in our imperfect instruments. Therefore, the goal here is stable correlation within measurable limits.
Meaning they know they aren't going to get a perfectly clean number, so they just want to know exactly how wrong they might be.
Exactly. Physicists are trained to aggressively hunt down their own biases, to quantify their uncertainties, and to reduce their error bars. They aren't trying to prove why gravity exists in some grand cosmic spiritual sense. They are just proving over and over again that massive objects attract each other with a specific, predictable mathematical relationship.
I think a perfect example of this and of that intersubjective verification we just talked about is how they proved Einstein's theory of general relativity.
Yes, perfect example.
Einstein didn't just write some math on a board and say, "Trust me, guys, space bends." He gave them a testable correlation. He said, if my math is right, then the massive gravity of the sun should physically bend the light of stars passing behind it. You'll only be able to see this during a total solar eclipse.
The famous Eddington experiment in 1919 is the ultimate story of the Temple of Physics.
Right, so Arthur Eddington, an English astronomer, packs up his fragile photographic plates and his telescopes, and he travels all the way to the island of Prince Bay off the coast of Africa to photograph a solar eclipse.
He's battling heat, humidity, clouds, almost ruining the view.
But he gets the photos, he measures the positions of the stars near the eclipsed sun, and compares them to where those stars normally are in the night sky. And sure enough, the starlight was bent, the correlation held.
But the crucial part isn't just that Eddington did it. It's that anyone else with a telescope and a solar eclipse could go out and check Eddington's work.
That's the essence of the temple, the great conservation laws, the conservation of energy, the conservation of momentum. They only survive in this building because generations of experiments run by thousands of different people in thousands of different labs over centuries continue to confirm them.
The Temple of Physics is a monument to collective measurement. It takes the terrifying, overwhelming scale of the universe and domesticates it into reliable equations.
So if physics is all ozone and cold metal and telescopes, what happens when we walk out the back doors of that temple and cross over to the third one? I'm picturing the Temple of Biological Correlation.
It probably looks like a massive Victorian greenhouse.
Yeah. The smell of damp soil, the sound of insects buzzing, shelves and shelves of bones and fossils. How does the concept of correlation change when the subjects are actually alive?
The variables multiply exponentially. As we move from matter to life, we are looking at the patterns of living systems. For so much of human history, we looked at the massive diversity of life on Earth, from the tiniest beetle to the blue whale, and we used that myth of the potter and the clay that we talked about in the prologue.
We assumed species appeared fully formed.
We believed they were fixed, unchanging, and placed in a specific, immutable hierarchy by a divine designer. A perfect set of finished clay vessels.
The ultimate cause. God caused the giraffe to have a long neck so it could eat the high leaves. Case closed.
Exactly. But then, in the 19th century, the guardians of this third temple completely flipped the script. Thanks to naturalists like Charles Darwin voyaging on the Beagle, and later, an Augustinian friar named Gregor Mendel quietly counting peas in his monastery garden, biology began to notice entirely new correlations.
They didn't see fixed forms anymore. They saw slow, agonizingly gradual changes across populations.
They shifted from looking at a snapshot to looking at a movie that's been playing for 4 billion years.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. A 4 billion-year movie.
They uncovered the correlations of evolutionary biology. They began to trace the vast, immense archive of living history. It's all about variation, inheritance, and selection. It's the realization that life is a pattern that stretches across deep time. It's not a single act of creation. It's an incredibly long chain of biological correlation.
Every time we dig up a fossil of a feathered dinosaur, every time we sequence the genome of a fruit fly, every time we watch bacteria develop resistance to antibiotics in a petri dish in real time, we are adding a piece of data that verifies this pattern.
The temple of biology shows us that, given enough time, the smallest physical correlations, just slight mutations in DNA, can build the staggering complexity of the entire biosphere.
What's truly fascinating here is that as complexity increases, the difficulty of proving correlation increases as well.
Physics is complicated, but an electron doesn't try to deceive you. Biology is vastly more complex, but a fern doesn't have an ulterior motive.
Which makes the fourth and final temple the most daunting of all, the temple of social correlation. This is the domain of sociology, psychology, and economics.
And here's where it gets really difficult.
I have to say, I'm going to push back hard here. I can buy math, I can buy physics, I can even buy biology, but sociology. You want to put human behavior inside the same rigorous city of correlation as gravity and thermodynamics.
I know it sounds like a stretch.
Humans are notoriously messy and irrational. We lie on surveys, we hold grudges, we change our minds because we had a bad cup of coffee in the morning, we write poetry. How can you possibly find stable scientific correlations in a crowd of humans? Doesn't the math just completely break down?
It is an incredibly valid skepticism. It is unquestionably the most difficult temple to build, precisely because human researchers are studying human subjects. That introduces massive layers of cultural perspective, interpretation, and inherent bias. But this is exactly where the genius of the Quadrivium Novum shines. It acknowledges the chaos of the individual, but looks for the pattern in the aggregate.
So an individual is a mystery, but a crowd is a data point.
Exactly. Thinkers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, like Emil Durkheim and Max Weber, laid the groundwork for this. They proved that even though an individual human might seem entirely unpredictable, human societies predictably generate patterns.
We consistently form institutions. We build economies based on recognizable supply and demand.
We develop structures of power. We exhibit measurable patterns of cooperation and conflict.
Okay, give me an example. How did they prove this wasn't just guesswork?
Let's look at Durkheim's groundbreaking study on suicide from 1897. Suicide is arguably the most intensely personal, psychological, and seemingly unpredictable act a human can take. It feels like the ultimate individual tragedy, the ultimate cracked clay.
For centuries, it was viewed solely as a moral failing or a private psychological collapse. Nobody thought there were math equations hiding behind it.
But Durkheim gathered massive amounts of statistical data across different European countries, and he found stunning, stable correlations. He found that suicide rates remained relatively congruent within specific societies over time.
Wow.
Furthermore, he found correlations between suicide rates and social integration. For example, he found different rates between unmarried and married people, between times of peace and times of economic upheaval, and even between different religious affiliations.
So he demonstrated that this intensely private act was heavily correlated with the level of social cohesion and structure surrounding the individual.
Yes. Even with all our messy emotions, our irrational biases, and our deep internal lives, sociology can pull the camera back high enough to say, look, when these specific economic or social conditions are met, this specific type of human behavior correlates strongly.
It's not saying John Doe will do X. It's saying, in a population of 1 million, this percentage will do X.
Precisely. It uncovers patterns that are robust enough to actually guide public policy, design cities, and govern nations. It is statistical correlation applied to human chaos.
So, if we stand right in the center courtyard of the Quadrivium Novum, we are surrounded by these 4 towering pillars. The correlations of logic, matter, life, and society. Math, physics, biology, sociology, they cover almost everything we interact with.
And they were all united by that one fundamental non-negotiable rule we talked about earlier.
Intersubjective verification across time.
Right?
And this rule brings us to the very edge of the city. We have to leave the temples now and walk toward the massive boundary walls, because the rule of the city isn't just a suggestion, it is the absolute law of the land.
If you want to put a claim, a belief, or a piece of knowledge inside this city, it has to survive the crucible. It has to be testable. It has to be repeatable. It must be verifiable by many different observers, regardless of what those observers personally want to believe.
And if your claim cannot survive that test, it is cast out, which introduces a profound and kind of harsh historical metaphor from Noak's sources, the practice of the Ostraca.
Yes, the Ostraca. It's a fascinating piece of history. In ancient Athens, the birthplace of democracy, the citizens had a very specific mechanism to protect the balance of their city. If a politician grew too powerful, or a prominent figure's influence threatened the stability of the state, the citizens would gather in the agora and hold a vote.
But they didn't use paper ballots. Paper was rare and expensive.
They used the trash lying around the marketplace, broken pieces of pottery, fragments of clay.
There's that clay again.
Exactly. These broken clay shards were called ostraca. A citizen would take a nail or a knife and scratch the name of the dangerous individual onto the clay shard. They would drop it in an urn, and if enough votes were cast, usually around 6,000, that person was physically sent into exile for 10 years. Banishment. It's where we get the English word ostracize.
It is such a powerful, heavy image. The broken piece of a vessel, the cracked clay from our prologue, being used as a weapon to cast someone out of the gates.
Very evocative.
And this raises an incredibly important, provocative question for you, the listener. Think about the entire history of human thought. Think about the things you hold dear. Are there ancient, revered institutions, massive bodies of human thought, whose claims to ultimate authority simply cannot be sustained by the rigorous, unfeeling rules of the four temples?
There absolutely are. And this is where Noak's map of the Quadrivium Novum becomes philosophically ruthless. Because there are two massive historical voices that have repeatedly demanded to govern our understanding of reality, but when they are forced to submit to the test of intersubjective verification, they fail.
They cannot produce the correlations required.
And so, we must look at the names scratched onto the ostraca lying in the dust outside the heavy gates of the city.
I am bending down. I am picking up the first shard of baked clay from the dirt, and the name scratched roughly into it is philosophy.
This is the profound exile. We are talking about the grand tradition of Plato, of Aristotle, of Immanuel Kant, of
The
Descartes.
heavy hitters.
The reason philosophy is written on the ostracon, the reason it is banished from the ruling center of the city, is because philosophy fundamentally seeks ultimate causes.
Yeah.
It wants to know the foundational nature of being. It wants to deduce the invisible structure of reality through pure reason, logic, and argumentation. It wants to answer the why.
But as we've established, the temples don't care about ultimate causes. They only care about verifiable patterns.
But philosophy is incredibly valuable. It can interpret the data coming out of the temples. It can speculate brilliantly about what the data means for human existence. It can formulate the ethical questions that scientists go on to test.
But on its own, philosophy cannot verify its grand metaphysical claims through chains of correlated, observable events. You cannot build a spectrometer that detects Aristotelian substance.
Therefore, it cannot hold governing authority inside the Quadrivium. It has to stand outside the gates.
And this brings us to the second shard of clay. The second name scratched into the ostracon is religion.
I have to say, this one is going to hit even harder for a lot of people listening.
It undeniably does, because religion seeks something even deeper and more personal than causes. Religion seeks ultimate meaning.
It speaks to the very core of the human condition. It provides the grand narratives that explain our suffering, our purpose, and our ultimate destiny. It speaks directly to the sorrow we heard in the cracked clay poem.
It offers a direct, comforting answer to the person crying out, "If vessel breaks, who shaped it wrong?" It says, the potter has a plan for the crack.
But here's the cold, hard reality of the city of correlation. Religion's claims are entirely insulated from intersubjective verification. You cannot take the concept of divine intention and reproduce it in a laboratory.
You cannot demonstrate a mathematical proof for the existence of the human soul that every trained observer on Earth, regardless of their faith, is forced to accept by sheer logic.
Religious truth is deeply personal. It is often revelatory. It relies on faith. But it fundamentally evades the rigorous methodology of the temples.
I want to pause here because it is absolutely vital to clarify the nature of this exile. Banishment to the Ostraca does not mean execution.
No, not at all.
The Quadrivium Novum is not destroying philosophy or religion. It is not saying they are useless or toxic or that they have no value to the human heart. It is simply stating a strict boundary of epistemology.
Epistemology. Another big one. Let's translate that for the listener.
Epistemology is simply the study of how we know what we know. It's the rules of evidence. The city is saying, if you want to claim you know how the universe works, you have to play by the rules of correlation.
Philosophy and religion operate on different rules of evidence. They will continue to inspire breathtaking art, poetry, music, and profound moral reflection. They are essential to the depth of the human experience, but they must stand outside the gates of verified correlation. They cannot claim to write the laws of the physical or social universe.
Think about how you, the listener, navigate your own day. You are constantly commuting across this boundary. When you read a medical study about whether coffee is good for your heart, you are standing squarely inside the temple of biology, looking at correlation. You trust the data.
But when you attend this funeral, and you look for meaning in the loss of someone you love, you aren't looking for a biological correlation. You have stepped outside the city gates. You're looking for philosophy. You are looking for religion.
We all commute back and forth across this boundary every single day.
That is a beautiful way to put it. We live in a divided landscape. Inside the walls, we have the cold, beautiful rigor of what we can prove. Outside the walls, we have the desperate, beautiful longing for what it all means.
And this brings us to an incredible piece of poetic irony that Witold Piotr Nowak weaves into this entire framework. Think about the material we just used to exile religion and philosophy. We wrote their names on Ostraca, broken shards of clay.
Yes. The symmetry is striking. The very material used to write the decree of exile is the exact same material used in the ancient religious story of creation and the exact same material from the blues poem Cracked Clay that started our journey.
The clay forms the vessel, the clay breaks, and the broken clay becomes the tablet of banishment.
It's stunning.
And this leads us to the epilogue of our deep dive. We've spent all this time inside the rigorous, demanding, silent walls of the city, but now we are going to walk outside. We're going to sit with the exiles in the dust for a moment.
We're going to look at Nowak's other musical piece, his Polish song Agaska, which translates to grace.
And let me tell you, the imagery here is just a total breath of fresh air after the heavy, oppressive stone of the temples. Let me share how it feels. The lyrics paint a picture. By the sea, where marble held the warmth of the sun, flowers along the wall and the sea kept whispering without end. A terrace with a table.
The transition in tone is almost physical. We move from the violent smack of the cracked clay and the exhausting, endless demands of the Quadrivium's verification to a quiet terrace by a whispering sea.
This song explores the profound emotional intuition of grace. In both religious and philosophical thought, grace is a concept that entirely defies the logic of cause and effect, and it completely ignores the concept of merit.
Grace is a gift that is not earned. It is freely, almost illogically given.
And in this vision, sitting on that sun-warmed terrace, the crack in the clay vessel takes on a completely different meaning. In the first poem, the prologue, the crack was a tragedy. It was the source of all our suffering, the proof that the potter messed up, the reason Job was crying out in the ashes.
But through the lens of Ostraca, through the lens of grace, the crack isn't just a flaw, it is an opening.
Yes. It is the very place where compassion, redemption, and mercy are able to enter the human experience. If the vessel were perfect, impenetrable, solid stone, nothing could get in. The brokenness is actually a prerequisite for grace.
It's a profound reframing of human vulnerability. But if we connect this back to the grand architecture of our episode, we have to acknowledge a hard truth about this beautiful moment.
We do.
The experience of grace, feeling that your brokenness has been met with unearned mercy, feeling that sense of peace on the terrace, is a deeply, profoundly meaningful experience for the individual. It can change a person's entire life. But it is a private correlation.
Right. If you feel grace on that sun-warmed terrace by the sea, it might be the realest thing you have ever experienced. But you cannot take that feeling into the temple of physics, put it in a beaker, and measure it on a spectrometer.
You cannot bring it into the temple of mathematics and write an equation for it on the chalkboard. The Quadrivium Novum cannot adjudicate your private meaning. It only recognizes patterns that everyone can verify, regardless of their spiritual state.
This creates a beautiful, poignant dualism for the listener. The temples of correlation must do their rigorous, unyielding work. We need them. They build our bridges so they don't collapse. They cure our diseases. They map our cosmos.
But human beings are not just correlation machines. We still need the songs sung outside the gates. We need the poetry of the cracked clay and the warm marble to comfort and inspire us when the cold, unfeeling facts of the universe offer absolutely no solace.
You, listening right now, have to navigate both of these spaces. You live in a world built by the Quadrivium, but you feel and love and grieve in a world populated by the Ostraca.
And that brings us to our final exploration today, the ultimate fate of this knowledge and the terrifying fragility of the correlations we worship.
Because the city of correlation is not guaranteed to stand forever, we tend to picture an endless chain. The mathematicians, the physicists, the biologists, the sociologists continuing their work day after day, generation after generation, into infinity.
We assume that because knowledge has been verified once, it is permanent. We treat science like a finished monument. But the Quadrivium Novum teaches us that knowledge is a living, breathing process.
And what happens if that living chain is broken? We live in an increasingly complex technological civilization. We store exabytes of data on server farms. We rely on artificial intelligence to process mathematical patterns we can't even see or comprehend anymore.
We assume the knowledge is safe because it's in the machine. But the temple requires human verification. It requires human trust, human understanding, and active human observation.
If the next generation loses the ability or simply loses the desire to understand the proofs, to run the experiments, to trace the sociology, what happens to the city?
This raises an incredibly sobering question. If the chain of human verification breaks, the temples do not collapse in a sudden, dramatic, cinematic explosion. They simply fade. They hollow out.
The books will still be on the shelves in the libraries. The equations will still be written on the servers.
But without the living, breathing process of human verification, that knowledge reverts to mere memory. And without the constant checking of correlation, our explanations of the world will inevitably revert back to unverified speculation. We'll look at a satellite dish and think it's a religious monument.
The Quadrivium Novum never promised us absolute eternal certainty. It offered us a durable method for navigating the dark, uncertain universe. But it only works as long as we keep maintaining it. It's like a massive, intricate garden. The moment the gardeners leave, the wilderness reclaims it.
It forces us to confront the reality that scientific rigor is not a default state of nature. It is a fragile, sustained human effort.
Okay, we have covered immense, sweeping ground today. Let's trace our steps back before we leave you. We started in the deep sorrow and tension of the cracked clay, confronting the fundamental flaw in human existence and our desperate, burning need to know why we suffer.
From there, we realized we had to abandon the search for invisible causality and enter the Quadrivium Novum, the four great temples of correlation.
We walk through mathematics, where logic requires human maintenance. We walk through physics, where we wrangle the messiness of matter into reliable error bars.
We explored biology, replacing sudden creation with deep time patterns. And we tackled sociology, discovering that even human chaos yields to statistical correlation.
We saw how human beings build rigorous knowledge not through absolute truth, but through verified, observable patterns.
Then, we walked to the boundaries of that city and confronted the Ostraca. We saw why philosophy, in its search for ultimate causes, and religion, in its search for ultimate meaning, had to be exiled to the broken shards of clay.
Not because they're worthless, never because they're worthless, but because they cannot be intersubjectively verified. Finally, we sat outside the gates and felt the warmth of grace, recognizing that the private meaning of our brokenness still holds immense power for the human heart, even if the temples remain entirely silent on the matter.
It is a stunning, demanding, and ultimately beautiful map of reality designed by Witold Piotr Nowak. Navigating the space between what we can rigorously prove and what we desperately long to mean is the ultimate human journey.
We want to thank you, the listener, for taking this deep dive with us today. It's a heavy topic, but it changes the way you look at every headline, every scientific study, and every moment of private grace.
And as we leave you today, I want to offer one final lingering question to mull over on your own. We've established that the grand, towering temples of correlation require a living, continuous chain of human verification to survive. It's a chain of minds that is actually incredibly fragile. But the Ostraca, the broken shards of clay carrying the exiled questions of philosophy and the unverified desperate hopes of religion, are made of earth and fire. They are dirt, baked hard in the sun. If the living chains of the temples ever do fade into silence, and the equations are forgotten by humanity, is it possible that the broken clay of our unproven hopes will actually be the only thing that physically outlasts us in the dust?
nad morzem, gdzie marmur był ciepły od słońca. Kwiaty przy murze, a morze szumiało bez końca. Taras ze stołem w ciche popołudnie. Chleb, wino i owoce spoczywały schludnie. A morze szumiało bez końca. Słońce tańczyło w blaskach. Na tarasie ktoś czekał. Czy to była? Czy to była? Wypatrywała z daleka, czekała, spokojna i miła, się uśmiechała. Nie pytała o imię, nie mówiła, tylko stół pięknie zastawiła. A morze szumiało bez końca. Słońce tańczyło w blaskach. Na tarasie ktoś czekał. Czy to była? Czy to była? Morze oddychało, słońce milczało. Motyl nad stołem krążył przez chwilę. Tamtego dnia w tych blaskach pomyślałem, czy to była? A morze szumiało bez końca. Słońce tańczyło w blaskach. Na tarasie ktoś czekał. Czy to była łaska? Czy to była łaska? Czy to była